So Manhattan, New York, is a lot like downtown Spokane, except it's magnified by about a gazillion people. When I lived there about 8 years ago, by necessity, like everyone else, I had to learn how to walk over and around those people who were standing, sitting, or lying on the streets. Begging, 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 always begging. Of course, we all know that this is the same situation today in Los Angeles, in Seattle, in San Francisco, in Portland, and it is what many predict that Spokane will be like in the not too distant future, if it already isn't today. Let me tell you about one homeless woman in Manhattan named Irene. I don't know if Irene is still alive or not, but every time I hear this parable from Jesus, I think of Irene. Now, just to give you a graphic picture of Irene, Irene was morbidly obese. Her clothes were meant for a much younger version of herself, and here I'm talking about years younger. Her teeth, or the few stubs that were left, were also pretty much a thing of the past. She had sores all over her mounds of exposed skin from fleas and lice and rat bites from the night before, and she would constantly be scratching at those sores. Irene was always in possession of a shopping cart or two, which she would fill each day with treasures that she found from the huge garbage bins. And she would always tuck them in the bushes so nobody would possibly pick up her treasures, as if they would want to. Each morning, Irene would languidly go about her bodily functions in front of God and everyone, because she didn't know any better. One of the most endearing peculiarities about Irene was that she would wear about 3 layers of glasses that she had somewhere picked up, and all at the same time. She would have them sort of like Snoopy the Red Baron, you know how he has goggles on. So by afternoon, it would sort of warm up, and she always had her place in front of the church where I worked. There was an iron gate, and she used to lean on one elbow, and she had her 3 glasses, 3 pairs on, and she'd be leaning, and she would usually kind of turn the pages of the New York Times and take in the events of the day. It was precious. The truth is, I saw Irene quite often. In fact, I'm ashamed to say there was probably a few years there where she was so intimidating that I was afraid to meet her. She certainly did attract attention, as I mentioned, in various ways, but I think the question that I have today for myself is, did I actually see her? What do you want to bet that the rich man that we sometimes call Dives did actually not actually see Lazarus? That wretched, suffering, sore-covered beggar who was right there at his door, right under his nose every day. Perhaps the rich man was simply concerned with other things. Perhaps he was otherwise engaged. Of course, he saw Lazarus, but only enough to step over him and not stumble. Perhaps Lazarus, or the rich man, had, like me, studied the problem of the poor. Perhaps he considered those difficult questions of whether it is good or bad to give money to beggars. Maybe he himself had even dropped a coin in his hands as he moved past him. perhaps like so many of us, he had compassion fatigue. This is important to register. Dives was not necessarily a bad person. The problem was that he just didn't see another human being as a fellow human being, as someone that he could actually help. The bottom line is he really didn't see Lazarus. Not in his lifetime, but here's the zinger. We might think that after his death, perhaps the rich man who is languishing in the flames of Hades might actually just pause and ask himself, self, did I miss something in my lifetime when I was feasting every day with so much food that it was falling out of my mouth, and when it fell on the plate and onto the table and Lazarus was asking if he could simply eat those crumbs, and I said, no. Self, was there something wrong with this picture? Even now, should I ask for Lazarus's forgiveness? Here's what I want to mention about the way that this parable batters my hard-heartedness. This is one of the telling signs when I know that I am nearing the gates of Hades. It is when I bump into my hopelessness at the plight of those less fortunate than myself. When I have even closed off my need for their forgiveness, the forgiveness that only they can offer me. Here might be the part of why the rich man is in Hades and can't seem to get out. Notice this. Even in Hades, Dives avoids speaking to someone so beneath him, such as Lazarus. Instead, he ignores Lazarus and goes straight to Abraham, who he assumes to be more his peer. And then he assumes that Lazarus would still make a good errand boy, someone to fetch him a little water, if Abraham would order him to do it. This morning, we're here because we want to consider this chasm that now imprisons the rich man in a place of torment, but it's also the chasm between you and me and the poorest of the poor. Here's what I want to ask. Is there anything we can do? Is there any step we can take to move out of this hellish situation, the hell of hopelessness? This past week, I read the statistic, and I know I put it such that I could tell you where it's from. I went crazy last night looking for this, but I know I read it, and perhaps you saw it as well. It was an article that was saying in all the counties in the entire United States, there is not one place where someone who works a minimum wage job can actually afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Oftentimes, even when they're working 2 jobs. And believe me, in many, many towns, cities, the big places, even 3 jobs will not afford a place where people can live. That's one of the primary reasons for homelessness, particularly among families, is the lack of affordable housing. That's just one aspect of walking over and around Irene today. You know the others: mental illness, drugs, abuse, on and on. It's just so hard to know, how can we help? Or this, what difference can we actually make? You know, after a few years in New York, I did run into just one thing, and this is what Irene taught me. One day, I was going around her carefully, and it just occurred to me, at that point, I didn't know her name. And for some reason, I slowed down and I said, "Hi, my name's Reverend Linda. What's your name?" And she looked up, so startled. Here's the thing that I learned. So many people that are homeless go crazy within 3 years because people walk over and around and don't address them as a human being. Nobody slows down enough to say, "What's your name?" And then later, "What's your story?" And then, "Here's part of my story." Why don't we meet like human beings? What can we do? Jesus comes first to cure us of our blindness. And today we're here because we ask Jesus to heal us, to give us imagination and the heart, first of all, to see and meet the Irenes that come into our lives. In the end, we know this: Jesus knows each one of us by name. For us, Jesus has crossed the biggest chasm of all, the chasm between heaven and hell, between true life and no life at all. I wonder if to God it felt like a hopeless plan, but somehow he was desperate enough to reach us. May that desperate plan that Jesus brings to us, a God that intends a different world, may he touch our skeptical hearts. This week, perhaps you can learn the name of one homeless person that you pass. That will be my challenge as well. If you do so, share your name. Remember, each time you're just about to drive by, to walk by, to avoid, to wonder, just to wonder, I wonder what difference I could make today. Amen.